Welcome to the Westminster channel. Delighted to say today I'm joined by Richard Tice, of course, businessman and chairman of the Brexit Party. Richard, how are you?
I'm grateful. I'm great to be with you, Michael. Thank you very much indeed. But my word, we've got some challenging times, haven't we?
Yeah, well, look, we've got to start off with, of course, the Boris Johnson statement last night. Of course, we're now looking at potentially the prospect of 6 more months of coronavirus restrictions. What do you make of that, Richard?
Look, I'm appalled actually because this is what I call an absurd, authoritarian overreaction by the Prime Minister that completely misrepresents the true position that we are currently in. And he is essentially terrifying the nation with a misinterpretation of the real data. Let me put to you the positive spin, actually, of where we are. The reality is, thanks to what we've learned from this virus, thanks to our doctors and our consultants, we've worked out much better ways to treat this disease using drugs like remdesivir, like dexamethasone, using proning where you keep people on their front, so that actually the death rate has fortunately, thankfully, reduced to incredibly low levels. So the death rate now, you're between 5 and 10 more times more likely to die of flu or pneumonia than you are of COVID. Michael, 1,600 people die every single day, sadly, in the UK. That's a 5-year average. COVID currently represents between 20 and 30 deaths a day. So it's about 2% of all daily deaths. Every death is a sadness, but actually we're succeeding. We're getting on top of this disease. And we should celebrate that whilst recognizing that we've got to do better. But the truth is that you cannot, this vaccine is going to be with us, this virus will be with us for decades. You can't defeat or destroy a virus. We may be able to get a vaccine and it may be efficient, but it may not. Look how many times we think we've got vaccines for the flu that don't work. So we've got to learn to live with it, to mitigate it, and to manage it. And actually, we're doing quite well at that. And if you look at the data, and I was appalled at what Chris Whitty presented, the Chief Medical Officer, to the nation on Monday. He totally misrepresented the real data. He put a graph up showing what would happen if the cases doubled every 7 days. Well, the cases are not doubling every 7 days. That's the point. And what he didn't say is that we're testing far more now. We're testing over 200,000 a day regularly. And in a way, yes, there's some issues with track and trace, but there has been some successes there. And these cases represent about between 1 and 2% every day of all those tests that are carried out. And the vast majority of those people who have a positive test, they don't even know they've got the disease. They've got no symptoms. Why? Because a lot of those tests are being done amongst young people. There's another key point here, which the government either doesn't understand or doesn't tell us. There's a thing called false positives. And this is where, of all tests that are carried out, about 1% of all tests give a false positive test. So if you test 100 people, one person will give a false positive. But we know currently, of all the tests that are being carried out, it's only triggering a positive test for people of between 1 and 2%. So what that actually shows is that the vast majority of the current positive cases are probably a false reading. And that's why, when you look at the other good news, which is that hospitalization rates are incredibly low. They've barely shifted at all. They've crept upwards a bit, and death rates have barely shifted. They were at about 5 to 10 a day. They're running at a 7-day rolling average of about between 20 and 25 a day. That's all good news, and that's the positive message that the government and the Prime Minister should be giving to the nation and saying, keep working at it, but we've got to live with this. We've got to keep applying sensible measures like washing our hands, like wearing a mask in shops. We think that helps. We don't in truth totally know, but it probably does help a bit. And sensible social distancing. But otherwise, folks, we can't destroy the economy anymore. And actually what we should do is we should look to the successes of Sweden. Far too few people talk about, the success that they've had. They didn't lock down their economy. They didn't terrify the nation. They had a voluntary series of measures that the population by and large followed, and they've had, guess what, a lower death rate per million than the UK, and they're not seeing a surge in cases now. Those are the positives that the Prime Minister should have told the nation.
Now, you've been very outspoken on this. You've described the Prime Minister as Boris the bully, and you've said that economic ruin awaits as Boris's cure far worse than problem. In terms of the economic side of this, Richard, what's your outlook of where we are and where we could be headed as a country?
Well, the tragedy is that businesses had just started to be getting going again, particularly in things like the hospitality sector, shops, bars, cafes, dry cleaners, people that had to shut down during the crisis. They'd got going again, and now essentially we've all been told, actually, no, folks, don't come back to the office, stay at home. So many of those businesses who'd just been hanging on literally by their fingernails, I think many of those will give up. More and more staff will be laid off. My local coffee shop just down the road from my office, for example, their average turnover per day is 10% of pre-COVID levels. They used to employ they used to employ 7 people, they now employ 2. They'll be shut and gone by Christmas. And that's happening all over the economy. Just today, we've had an announcement from Premier Inn, thousands and thousands of people being laid off. Sorry, it was yesterday. Wetherspoons laying off hundreds of people. And this is just the beginning. Many businesses, small, medium and large, will say, enough's enough, I've tried, but it's quite clear we've got 6 months of this, if not more. And so they're going to say, I've got to let people go. The Chancellor has said that furlough is ending. I mean, I suspect he'll have no choice but to extend it. But why would businesses invest in more staff, in more equipment and things to get going again when you're faced with this huge uncertainty? Sadly, they won't. They'll just say, it's much easier and much less risky than risking my hard-earned cash to let people go, batten down the hatches and see what happens in the middle of next year.
Now, Richard, I know a lot of people that are watching on the Westminster channel who comment are asking, there is some criticism at the moment of the government, and they're asking in terms of you, in terms of Nigel Farage, in terms of the Brexit Party. Obviously, you're still the chairman of that. What's your outlook on where the Brexit Party is at the moment?
So we'd very clearly said that we were in sort of care and maintenance, watching over the government on their Brexit negotiations, and we wanted to keep a real focus on that. And, we respected the difficulties the government had with COVID. And let's give credit where credit is due. On Brexit, which is, of course, the foundation stone of this government, actually, I think the chief negotiator, David Frost, has done a brilliant job to date. He's held firm. He's batted for Britain all the way through. He's more than a good match for Michel Barnier. And at the moment, I actually trust that they will hold firm. And let's see. I think ultimately there probably will be some form of partial deal. But to get a good deal, you have to be prepared to walk away. And David Frost and Boris Johnson have made it very clear that they're quite prepared to walk away. And the truth is, as I have always said, no deal is always better than a bad deal. And also, actually, no deal, no problem. We've had 4 years to get ready for it. And because of COVID, and because there's much less international trade, those who think that it would be hugely disruptive, which I don't buy into, but of course, if you've got less trade, then actually there'll be, even if they're right and I'm wrong, there'll be less issues going across the border because there's less trade moving across borders. And it's also taught us something really important, hasn't it, Michael, which is all this focus on the importance of global just-in-time supply chains. Well, at the first sign of real trouble, guess what? They broke. And so actually what we should be doing is we need to think British, we need to make much more here in Britain, and we need to buy British. And that's where we should admire the French. They're such wonderful, patriotic consumers of their own products. And I really admire that. And I think we should be pushing much more for that, particular critical items. Who knew that almost all paracetamol was made in India? And therefore we had a paracetamol shortage at the beginning of the crisis. These are critical medicines that we should ensure we are making here in the UK. Insulin, we should, of course, be making plenty of it here in the UK. We should be producing enough food ourselves, our farmers, like we were in the 1980s when we were producing 80% of what we consumed. That figure now is less than 60%. These are all opportunities where our British businesses, companies, and manufacturers can actually manufacture important elements that are what I call items of critical national infrastructure.
Finally, before we end this, have you got a couple of specific critiques of the government of certain things you'd like to see them change course and do if you were in charge?
I would like them to sell the positive picture of actually the way that we are now, in truth, on top of COVID. We know much more about it. Our great doctors and consultants and nurses have identified much better ways to treat it, and therefore the likelihood of dying is much, much, much lower than it was. So we're better at treating it, and we've got a bigger testing system. It needs to be a lot better, but we're tracing it faster. So therefore, these are successes, and these are the reasons why actually we should be confident. We should maintain important health measures, hands and things, but sell a picture of optimism. Sell the fact that we should look forward to Christmas and the New Year. And of course, at those times, be careful, rather than a picture of doom and gloom, an authoritarian, dictatorial picture that we've now got of Field Marshal Lord Johnson with his COVID marshals, his curfews, his soldiers, his massive fines, and his police enforcing the law. This is all a ludicrous, absurd, appalling way to run a country. And let's learn from what I think are the smart, intelligent lessons that you see from how Sweden has done it. They've had many successes. Of course, they've made mistakes. Of course, they know they didn't protect care homes enough. And we can all learn from that. But let's be positive, recognize the mistakes, learn from them, but actually give confidence to nature, give optimism, give hope, give ambition. Don't terrify us, don't petrify us, and certainly don't threaten us with your bully boy tactics about what might happen if we don't behave.
Richard, great to have your insight on the Westminster channel. Guys, if you've enjoyed this interview as ever, remember to subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss future reports. Richard Tice, we'll speak soon, I'm sure.
Great pleasure. Thanks, Michael.